It was summertime, already hot at 9 a.m., but even out at the ugly rock dump, with the big machine shop across the highway where they had the not-so-hygienic toilet Tommy used, it was blue overhead and beautiful, and pretty soon families started driving up in cars to visit. One guy stuck his head out the car window and asked me, "Is this the one where the kids can go in and pick rocks and stuff?" "Yep," I said, instead of yes. "You got kids here?" Tommy asked him. He pointed to two in the back seat. "Right here, sir," Tommy said. "Go in and look around, and when you go out, right here, $50 a bag for a miner who mined them for 30 years. Special rocks for the kids." An elderly woman drove up in a car full of kids, her grandchildren probably, and when she got out, Tommy politely saluted her. "Lady, when you're going out and you want a nice bag of rocks for the little ones from a miner who mined them for 30 years, stop here. 50 cents a bag, special rocks for the kids. They fluoresce beautifully." Getting in the swing of things, getting in the swing of the joys of the profit motive as it functioned in Zinktown, I told her, "He's got the good stuff, lady." "I'm the only one," he told her, "who makes these bags. These bags are from the good mine. The other is completely different. I don't put no junk in there. There's real stuff in there. If you see 'em under light, you'll enjoy what's in there. There's pieces in there only comes from this mine, nowhere else in the world." "You're in the sun without a hat," she told Tommy. "You don't get hot sitting there like that?" "Been doing this many years," he told her. "See these ones on my car? These fluoresce different colors. They look ugly, but they're nice under light. They got different things in them. It's got a lot of different mixtures in. This is a fella, not fellow," said I, "who really knows rocks. 30 years in the mines," I said. Then a couple pulled up who looked more like city people than any of the other tourists. As soon as they got out of their car, they began to examine Tommy's higher-priced specimens on the hood of the car and to consult together quietly. Tommy whispered to me, "They want my rocks in the worst way. I got a collection. Nobody can touch it. This here's the most extraordinary mineral deposit on this planet, and I got the best of them." Here, I piped up, "This guy's got the best stuff. 30 years in the mines. He's got beautiful rocks here, beautiful rocks." And they bought 4 pieces for a sale totaling $55, and I thought, I'm helping a real miner. "If you want any minerals again," I said as they got back with their purchase into the car, "you come here. This here's the most extraordinary mineral deposit on this planet." I was having a fine time of it until close to noon, Brownie arrived, and the silly gratuitousness of the role I was so enthusiastically playing was revealed even to me. Brownie, Lloyd Brown, was a couple of years older than me, a skinny, crew-cutted, sharp-nosed boy, pale and harmless-looking in the extreme, particularly in the white shopkeeper's apron that he wore over a clean white shirt and a clip-on black bow tie and a pair of fresh dungarees. Because his relation to himself was so transparently simple, his chagrin when he saw me with Tommy was plastered all over him and pitiable. Compared with Brownie, I felt like a kid with the most abundant and frenzied existence, even just sitting quietly beside Tommy Minerick. Compared with Brownie, that's what I was. But if something about my complexity mocked him, something about his simplicity also mocked me. I turned everything into an adventure, looking always to be altered, while Brownie lived with a sense of nothing other than hard necessity, had been so shaped and tamed by constraint as to be able to play only the role of himself. He was without any craving that wasn't brewed in Zinktown. The only thoughts he ever wanted to think were the thoughts that everybody else in Zinktown thought. He wanted life to repeat and repeat itself, and I wanted to break out. I felt like a freak wanting to be other than Brownie. Perhaps for the very first time, but not for the last. What would it be like to have that passion to break out vanish from my life? What must it be like to be Brownie? Wasn't that what the fascination with the people was really all about? What is it like to be them? "You busy, Tom? I can come back tomorrow." "Stay here," Tommy said to the boy. "Sit down, Brownie." Deferentially, Brownie said to me, "I just come here every day on my lunch hour, and I talk to him about rocks." "Sit down, Brownie, my boy. So, what do you got?" Brownie laid a worn old satchel at Tommy's feet, and from it he began to extract rock specimens about the size of the ones Tommy was displaying on the hood of his car. "Black willemite, huh?" Brownie asked. "No, that's hematite." "I thought it was a funny-looking willemite." "And this," he asked, "Hendrixite?" Yep. Little Willemite. There's calcite, too, in there. $5 for that? Too much? Brownie asked. Somebody may want it, Tommy said. You in this business, too? I asked Brownie. This was my dad's collection. He was in the mill, got killed. I'm selling it to get married. Nice girl, Tommy told me. And she's a sweet girl. She's a doll. Slovak girl. The Musko girl. Nice girl, honest girl, clean girl who uses her head. There's no girls like her anymore. He's going to live with Mary Musko all his life. I tell Brownie, you be good to her, she'll be good to you. I had a wife like that. Slovak girl, best in the world. Nobody in the world can take her place. Brownie held up another specimen. Bustamite there with that? That's Bustamite. Got a little Willemite crystal on it. Yep. There's a little Willemite crystal right there. This went on for close to an hour, until Brownie started packing his specimens back in the satchel to return to the grocery store where he worked. He's going to take my place in Zinktown, Tommy told me. Oh, I don't know, Brownie said. I won't know as much as you do. But you still have to do it. All at once, Tommy's voice was fervent, almost anguished when he spoke. I want a Zinktown guy to take over my place. I want a Zinktown guy. That's why I'm teaching here as much as I can, so you can get someplace. You're the one who's entitled to it, a Zinktown person. I don't want to teach somebody else from out of town. 3 years ago, I started coming here lunchtime. I didn't know anything, and he taught me so much. Right, Tommy? I did pretty good today. Tommy can tell you the mine, Brownie said to me. He can tell you where in the mine it came from, what level, how deep. He says, you got to hold the rocks in your hand, right? Right. You got to hold the rocks in your hand. You got to handle that mineral. You got to see the different matrices that they come in. If you don't learn that, you're not going to learn Zinktown minerals. He even knows now. He knows if this is from the other mine or if it's from this mine. He taught me that, Brownie said. I couldn't tell what mine it came from in the beginning. I can tell now. So, I said, you're going to be sitting out here someday. I hope so. Like this right here. This is from this mine, right, Tom? And this is from this mine, too. Because in another year, I hope to go off on a scholarship to the University of Chicago and, after Chicago, become the Norman Corwin of my generation, because I was going everywhere and Brownie was going nowhere. But mostly because Brownie's father had been killed in the mill and my own was alive and well and worrying about me in Newark, I spoke even more fervently than Tommy had to this aproned grocer's assistant whose aspiration in life was to marry Mary Musko and fill Tommy's seat. Hey, you're good. That's good. And why? Said Tom. Because he learned right here. I learned from this man, Brownie told me proudly. I want him to be the next one to take my place. Here comes some business, Tom. I gotta run, Brownie said. Nice to meet you, he said to me. Nice to meet you, I replied, as though I were the older man and he the child. When I come back in 10 years, I said, I'll see you out here. Oh, said Tom, he'll be here all right. No, no, Brownie shouted back, for the first time laughing light-heartedly as he headed on foot down the highway. Tommy'll still be here, won't you, Tom? We'll see. In fact, it was Ira who would be out there 10 years later. Tommy had educated Ira, too, once Ira was blacklisted from radio and living alone up in the shack and needing a source of income. That was where Ira dropped dead. That's when Ira's aorta gave out, while he was sitting on Tommy's flat rock selling mineral specimens to the tourists and their kids, telling them, Lady, $50 a bag here for them when you boys come out. Special rocks right from the mine that I mined there for 30 years. This was how Ira ended his days, as the overseer at the rock dump, whom the local old-timers all called Gil, out there even in the wintertime making fires for certain people for a few bucks. But I didn't learn this until the night that Maury told me Ira's story there on my deck. The day before I left that second year, Artie Sokolow and his family drove out to Zinktown from New York to spend the afternoon with Ira. Ella Sokolow, Artie's wife, was about 7 months pregnant, a jolly, dark-haired, freckle-faced woman whose Irish immigrant father, Ira told me, had been a steam fitter up in Albany, one of those big, idealistic union men who are patriotic through and through. The Marseillaise, the Star-Spangled Banner, the Russian national anthem, Ella laughingly explained that afternoon, the old man would stand up for all of them. The Sokolows had twin boys of 6, and though the afternoon began happily enough with a game of touch football, refereed in a manner by Ira's neighbor Ray Spetz, and was followed by a picnic lunch that Ella had brought along from the city and that all of us, including Ray, ate, up the slope from the pond. It ended with Artie Sokolow and Ira down by the pond, toe-to-toe and barking at each other in a way that horrified me. I had been sitting on the picnic blanket talking to Ella about My Glorious Brothers, a book by Howard Fast that she had just finished reading. It was a historical novel set in ancient Judea about the Maccabee struggle against Antiochus IV in the 2nd century B.C., and I, too, had read it, and even reported on it in high school for Ira's brother the second time he was my English teacher. Ella had been listening to me the way she listened to everyone, taking it all in as if she were being warmed by your words. I must have gone on for close to 15 minutes, repeating word for word the internationalist progressive critique I'd written for Mr. Ringgold, and all the time Ella gave every indication that what I was saying couldn't have been more interesting. I knew how much Ira admired her as a lifelong radical, and I wanted her to admire me as a radical too. Her background, the physical grandeur of her pregnancy, and certain gestures she made, sweeping gestures with her hands that made her seem to be strikingly uninhibited, all bestowed on Ella Sokolow a heroic authority that I wanted to impress. I read fast and I respect fast, I'd been telling her, but I think he lays too much emphasis on the Judeans' fight to return to their past condition, to their worship of tradition and the days of post-Egyptian slavery. There's entirely too much that's merely nationalistic in the book, and that was when I heard Ira shout, "You're caving in, running scared and caving in." "If it's not there," Sokolow shot back, "no one knows it's not there. I know it's not there." The rage in Ira's voice made it impossible for me to go on. All I could think about suddenly was the story, which I had refused to believe, that ex-Sergeant Irwin Goldstein had told me in his Maplewood kitchen, about butts, about the guy in Iran that Ira tried to drown in the Shat al-Arab. I said to Ella, "What's the matter?" "Just give them room," she said, "and hope they calm down. You calm down." "I just want to know what they're arguing about." "They're blaming each other for things that have gone wrong. They're arguing over things having to do with the show. Calm down, Nathan. You haven't been around enough angry people. They'll cool off." But they didn't look it, Ira particularly. He was storming back and forth at the edge of the pond, his long arms lashing out every which way, and each time he turned back to Artie Sokolow, I thought he was going to pounce on him with his fists. "Why do you make these goddamn changes?" Ira shouted. "Keep it in," Sokolow replied, "and we stand to lose more than we gain." "Bullshit. Let the bastards know we mean business. Just put the fucking thing back in." I said to Ella, "Shouldn't we do something?" "I've heard men arguing all my life," she told me. "Men having one another's carcasses for the sins of omission and commission that they don't seem able to avoid perpetrating. If they were hitting each other, it would be something else. But otherwise, your responsibility is to stay away. If you enter where people are already agitated, anything you do will fuel the fire." "If you say so." "You've led a very protected life, haven't you?" "Have I?" I said. "I try not to." "Best to stay out of it," she told me. "Partly out of dignity to let the guy cool down without your intervention, and partly out of self-defense, and partly because your intervention is only going to make it worse." Meanwhile, Ira hadn't stopped roaring. "One fucking punch a week, and now we're not even going to get that in? So what are we doing on the radio, Arthur? Advancing our careers? A fight is being forced upon us, and you are running. It's the showdown, Artie, and you are gutlessly running away." Impotent, though I knew I would be if these two powder kegs were to start swinging, I nevertheless jumped up and, with Ray Spetz trailing behind me in his goofy way, ran toward the pond. Last time, I'd pissed in my pants. I couldn't let that happen again. With no more idea than Ray had of what could be done to avert a disaster, I ran directly into the fray. By the time we reached them, Ira had already backed off and was pointedly walking away from Sokolow. It was clear he was still furious with the guy, but it was also evident how hard he was trying to bring himself down. Ray and I caught up with him, and then walked along beside him, while intermittently, beneath his breath, Ira carried on a rapid conversation with himself. The admixture of his absence and his presence so disturbed me that I finally spoke. "What's wrong?" When he didn't seem to hear, I tried to think of what to say that would get his attention. "It's about a script?" all at once he flared up and said, "I'll kill him if he does that again." And it was not an expression he was using merely for dramatic effect. It was difficult, despite my resistance, not to believe 100% in the meaning of his words. Butts, I thought. Butts, Garwich, Solak, Becker. On his face was a look of total fury, pristine fury. Fury, which along with terror is the primordial power. All that he was had evolved out of that look. Also all that he was not. I thought, he's lucky he's not locked up. An alarmingly unexpected conclusion to occur spontaneously to a hero-worshipping kid interlinked for 2 years with the virtuousness of his hero, and one I dismissed once I was no longer so agitated, and one that I was then to have verified for me by Murray Ringgold, 48 years on. Eve had made her way out of her past by impersonating Pennington. Ira had made his way out of his by force. Ella's twin boys, who'd fled from the edge of the pond when the argument flared up, were lying in her arms on the picnic blanket when I returned with Ray. "I think daily living may be harsher than you know," Ella said to me. "Is this daily living?" I asked. "Wherever I've lived," she said. Go on about Howard fast." I did my best, but it continued to unsettle me, if not Sokolo's working-class wife, to think of her husband and Ira squaring off. Ella laughed aloud when I was through. You could hear her naturalness in her laugh, as well as all the crap that she had learned to put up with. She laughed the way some people blush, all at once and completely. "Wow," she said. "I'm not sure now what I read. My own evaluation of my glorious brothers is simple. Maybe I don't do enough deep thinking, but I just think, here's a bunch of rough, tough, and decent guys who believe in the dignity of all men and are willing to die for it." Artie and Ira had by then cooled off enough to make their way up from the pond to the picnic blanket, where, Ira said, trying apparently to say something that might ease everybody, himself included, back into the original spirit of the day, "I gotta read it, My Glorious Brothers, gotta get that book." "It'll put steel in your spine, Ira," Ella said to him. And then, opening wide the big window that was her laugh, she added, "Not that I ever thought yours needed any." Whereupon Sokolo leaned over her and bellowed, "Yes, whose does? Just whose does?" With that, the Sokolo twins burst into tears, and this in turn caused poor Ray to do the same. Angry herself now for the first time, in something like a mad rage, Ella said, "Christ almighty, Arthur, hold yourself together." What had lain beneath the afternoon's eruptions I understood more fully that evening, when, alone with me in the shack, Ira started in angrily about the lists. Lists! Lists of names and accusations and charges. Everybody, Ira said, has a list. Red Channels, Joe McCarthy, the VFW, the HUAC, the American Legion, the Catholic magazines, the Hearst newspapers. Those lists with their sacred numbers, 141, 205, 62, 111. Lists of anybody in America who has ever been disgruntled about anything or criticized anything or protested anything or associated with anybody who has ever criticized or protested anything. All of them now communist or fronting for communist or helping communist or contributing to communist coffers or infiltrating labor or government or education or Hollywood or the theater or radio and TV. List of fifth columnists busily being compiled in every office and agency in Washington. All the forces of reaction swapping names and mistaking names and linking names together to prove the existence of a mammoth conspiracy that does not exist. "What about you?" I asked him. "What about the free and the brave? We've got a lot of progressive thinking people on our show, sure. And the way they're going to be described to the public now is as actors who cunningly sell the Moscow line. You're going to hear a lot of that, a lot worse than that. The dupes of Moscow." "Just the actors?" "And the director and the composer and the writer, everyone." "You worried?" "I can go back to the record factory, buddy. If worst comes to worst, I can always come up here and grease cars at Steve's garage. I've done it before. Besides, you can fight them, you know. You can fight the bastards. Last I heard, there was a constitution in this country, a Bill of Rights, somewhere. If you look with your big eyes into the capitalist shop window, if you want and you want, if you grab and you grab, if you take and you take, if you acquire and you own and you accumulate, then this is the end of your convictions and the beginning of your fear. But there is nothing that I have that I can't give up, you understand? Nothing. How I ever got from my miserable father's shit-eating house on Factory Street to being this big character I am, and how Ira Ringgold, with 1.5 years of high school behind him, got to meeting the people I meet and knowing the people I know and having the comforts I have as a card-carrying member of the comfortable bourgeoisie. That is all so unbelievable that losing everything overnight would not seem so strange to me. You understand me? I can go back to Chicago. I can work in the mills if I have to, I will. But not without standing on my rights as an American, not without giving the bastards a fight. When I was alone and on the train heading back to Newark, Ira had waited at the station in the Chevy to pick up Mrs. Parn, who on the day I left was traveling all the way from New York again to work on those knees of his, aching terribly after our football game of the previous day. I even began to wonder how Ephraim could stand him day in and day out. Being married to Ira and his anger couldn't have been much fun. I remembered hearing him deliver virtually the same speech about the capitalist shop window, about his father's miserable house, about his 1.5 years of high school, on that afternoon the year before in Irwin Goldstein's kitchen. I remembered variants of that speech being delivered by Ira 10, 15 times. How could Eve take the sheer repetition, the redundancy of that rhetoric, and the attitude of the attacker, the relentless beating from the blunt instrument that was Ira's stump speech? On that train back to Newark, as I thought of Ira blasting away with his twin apocalyptic prophecies, the United States of America is about to make atomic war on the Soviet Union, mark my words. The United States of America is on the road to fascism. I didn't know enough to understand why suddenly, so disloyally, when he and people like Artie Sokolow were being most intimidated and threatened, I was so savagely bored by him. Why I felt myself to be so much smarter than he. Ready and eager to turn away from him and the irritating, oppressive side of him, and to find my inspiration far from Pickaxe Hill Road. If you're orphaned as early as Ira was, you fall into the situation that all men must fall into, but much, much sooner, which is tricky because you may either get no education at all or be over-susceptible to enthusiasms and beliefs and ripe for indoctrination. Ira's youthful years were a series of broken connections, a cruel family, frustration in school, headlong immersion in the Depression, an early orphaning that captured the imagination of a boy like me, himself so fixed in a family and a place and its institutions, a boy only just emerging from the emotional incubator, an early orphaning that freed Ira to connect to whatever he wanted, but also left him unmoored enough to give himself to something almost right off the bat, to give himself totally and forever. For all the reasons that you can think of, Ira was an easy mark for the utopian vision. But for me, who was moored, it was different. If you're not orphaned early, if instead you're related intensely to parents for 13, 14, 15 years, you grow a prick, lose your innocence, seek your independence, and if it's not a screwed-up family, are let go, ready to begin to be a man, ready, that is, to choose new allegiances and affiliations, the parents of your adulthood, the chosen parents whom, because you're not asked to acknowledge them with love, you either love or don't, as suits you. How are they chosen? Through a series of accidents and through lots of will. How do they get to you, and how do you get to them? Who are they? What is it, this genealogy that isn't genetic? In my case, they were men to whom I apprenticed myself, from Payne and Fast and Corwin to Murray and Ira and beyond, the men who schooled me, the men I came from. All were remarkable to me in their own way, personalities to contend with, mentors who embodied or espoused powerful ideas and who first taught me to navigate the world and its claims. The adopted parents who also, each in his turn, had to be cast off along with their legacy, had to disappear, thus making way for the orphanhood that is total, which is manhood, when you're out there in this thing all alone. Leo Glucksman was also an ex-GI, but he had served after the war and was now only in his mid-20s, rosy-cheeked and a little round, and looking no older than his first and second-year college students. Though Leo was still completing his dissertation for a literature Ph.D. at the university, he appeared before us at every session of the class in a three-piece black suit and a crimson bow tie, more formally attired by far than any of the older faculty members. When the weather turned cold, He could be seen crossing the quadrangle draped in a black cape that, even on a campus as untypically tolerant of idiosyncrasy and eccentricity, and as understanding of originality and its oddity as the University of Chicago's was in those days, titillated students whose bright and amused "Hi, Professor," Leo would acknowledge by sharply whacking the pavement with the metal tip of the cane he sported. After taking a hasty look one afternoon at the Stooge of Torquemada, which, to kindle Mr. Glucksman's admiration, I thought to bring to him along with the assigned essay on Aristotle's Poetics, Leo startled me by dropping it with disgust onto his desk. His speech was rapid, his tone fierce and unforgiving, no sign in that delivery of the foppishly overdressed boy genius plumply perched back of his bow tie on his cushioned seat. His plumpness and his personality exemplified two very different people. The clothes registered a third person, and his polemic a fourth. Not a mannerist, but a real adult critic, exposing to me the dangers of the tutelage I'd been under with Ira, teaching me to assume a position less rigid in confronting literature. Precisely what I was ready for in my new recruitment phase. Under Leo's guidance, I began to be transformed into the descendant not just of my family, but of the past, heir to a culture even grander than my neighborhood's. "Art as a weapon?" he said to me. The word weapon rich with contempt and itself a weapon. Art as taking the right stand on everything. Art as the advocate of good things. Who taught you all this? Who taught you art is slogans? Who taught you art is in the service of the people? Art is in the service of art. Otherwise, there is no art worthy of anyone's attention. What is the motive for writing serious literature, Mr. Zuckerman? To disarm the enemies of price control. The motive for writing serious literature is to write serious literature. You want to rebel against society? I'll tell you how to do it. Write well. You want to embrace a lost cause? Then don't fight in behalf of the laboring class. They're going to make out fine. They're going to fill up on Plymouths to their heart's content. The working man will conquer us all. Out of his mindlessness will flow the slop that is this Philistine country's cultural destiny. We'll soon have something in this country far worse than the government of the peasants and the workers. We will have the culture of the peasants and the workers. You want a lost cause to fight for? Then fight for the word. Not the high-flown word, not the inspiring word, not the pro-this and anti-that word, not the word that advertises to the respectable that you are a wonderful, admirable, compassionate person on the side of the downtrodden and the oppressed. No. For the word that tells the literate few condemned to live in America that you are on the side of the word. This play of yours, it's crap. It's awful. It's infuriating. It is crude, primitive, simple-minded, propagandistic crap. It blurs the world with words, and it reeks the high heaven of your virtue. Nothing has a more sinister effect on art than an artist's desire to prove that he's good. The terrible temptation of idealism. You must achieve mastery over your idealism, over your virtue as well as over your vice. Aesthetic mastery over everything that drives you to write in the first place. Your outrage, your politics, your grief, your love. Start preaching and taking positions. Start seeing your own perspective as superior, and you're worthless as an artist, worthless and ludicrous. Why do you write these proclamations? Because you look around and you're shocked? Because you look around and you're moved? People give up too easily and fake their feelings. They want to have feelings right away, and so shocked and moved are the easiest, the stupidest. Except for the rare case, Mr. Zuckerman, shock is always fake. Proclamations. Art has no use for proclamations. Get your lovable shit out of this office, please. Leo thought better of my Aristotle essay, or generally of me, for at my next conference he startled me, no less than he had with his vehemence about my play, by ordering my presence at Orchestra Hall to hear Raphael Kubelik lead the Chicago Symphony Orchestra in Beethoven on Friday night. Have you ever heard of Raphael Kubelik? No. Beethoven? I've heard of him, yes, I said. Have you ever heard him? No. I met Leo on Michigan Avenue outside Orchestra Hall half an hour before the performance. My teacher in the cape he'd had made in Rome before being mustered out of the Army in '48, and I in the hooded Mackinaw bought at Larky's in Newark to take to college in the icy Middle West. Once we were seated, Leo removed from his briefcase the score for each of the symphonies we were to hear, and throughout the concert looked not at the orchestra on the stage, which you were supposed to look at, I thought, only occasionally closing your eyes when you were carried away, but rather into his lap, where, with his considerable concentration, he read along in the score while the musicians played first the Coriolan Overture and the Fourth Symphony, and after the intermission, the Fifth. Except for the first four notes of the Fifth, I couldn't distinguish one piece from the others. Following the concert, we took the train back to the South Side and went to his room at International House, a Gothic residence hall on the Midway that was home to most of the university's foreign students. Leo Glucksman, himself the son of a West Side grocer, was slightly better prepared to tolerate their proximity on his hallway, exotic cooking smells and all, than he was that of his fellow Americans. The room he lived in was tinier even than his office cubicle at the college, and he made tea for us by boiling water in a kettle set on a hot plate resting on the floor and squeezed in among the clutter of printed matter piled up along the walls. Leo sat at his book-laden desk, his round cheeks lit up by his gooseneck lamp, and I sat in the dark amid more piles of books on the edge of the narrow, unmade bed only 2 feet away. I felt like a girl, or what I imagined a girl felt like, when she wound up alone with an intimidating boy who too obviously liked her breasts. Leo snorted to see me turn timorous, and with that same disgusted sneer with which he had undertaken to demolish my career in radio, he said, "Don't worry, I'm not going to touch you. I just cannot bear that you should be so fucking conventional." And then and there, he proceeded to initiate an introduction into Søren Kierkegaard. He wanted me to listen to him read what Kierkegaard, whose name meant no more to me than Raphael Kubelicz, had already surmised in backwater Copenhagen 100 years ago about the people, whom Kierkegaard called the public. The correct name, Leo informed me, for that abstraction, that monstrous abstraction, that all-embracing something which is nothing, that monstrous nothing, as Kierkegaard wrote, that abstract and deserted void, which is everything and nothing, and which I mawkishly sentimentalized in my script. Kierkegaard hated the public. Leo hated the public, and Leo's purpose in his darkened International House room after that Friday night's concert, and the concerts he took me to on the Fridays following, was to save my prose from perdition by getting me to hate the public too. Everyone who has read the classical authors, read Leo, knows how many things a Caesar could try out in order to kill time. In the same way, the public keeps a dog to amuse it. That dog is the scum of the literary world. If there is someone superior to the rest, perhaps even a great man, the dog is set on him and the fun begins. The dog goes for him, snapping and tearing at his coattails, allowing itself every possible ill-mannered familiarity until the public tires and says it may stop. That is my example of how the public levels. Their betters and superiors in strength are mishandled, and the dog remains a dog which even the public despises. The public is unrepentant. It was not really belittling anyone, it just wanted a little amusement. This passage, which meant far more to Leo than it could begin to mean to me, was nonetheless Leo Glucksman's invitation to join him in being someone superior to the rest, in being like the Danish philosopher Kierkegaard, and like himself, as he could one day soon envision himself, a great man. I became Leo's willing student and, through his intercession, Aristotle's willing student, Kierkegaard's willing student, Benedetto Croce's willing student, Thomas Mann's willing student, André Gide's willing student, Joseph Conrad's willing student, Fyodor Dostoevsky's willing student, until soon my attachment to Ira, as to my mother, my father, my brother, even to the place where I had grown up, was, I believe, thoroughly sundered. When someone is first being educated and his head is becoming transformed into an arsenal armed with books, when he is young and impudent and leaping with joy to discover all the intelligence tucked away on this planet, he is apt to exaggerate the importance of the churning new reality and to deprecate as unimportant everything else. Aided and abetted by the uncompromising Leo Glucksman, by his bile and manias as much as by that perpetually charged-up brain, this is what I did, with all my strength. Every Friday night, in Leo's room, the spell was cast. All the passion in Leo that was not sexual, and a lot that was but had to be suppressed, he brought to bear on every idea that I had previously been made of, particularly on my virtuous conception of the artistic mission. Leo went at me on those Friday nights as though I were the last student left on earth. It began to seem to me that just about everybody gave me a shot. Educate Nathan, the credo of everybody I dared say hello to. Occasionally now, looking back, I think of my life as one long speech that I've been listening to. The rhetoric is sometimes original, sometimes pleasurable, sometimes pasteboard crap, the speech of the incognito. Sometimes maniacal, sometimes matter-of-fact, and sometimes like the sharp prick of a needle. And I have been hearing it for as long as I can remember. How to think, how not to think, how to behave, how not to behave, whom to loathe and whom to admire, what to embrace and when to escape, what is rapturous, what is murderous, what is laudable, what is shallow, what is sinister, what is shit, and how to remain pure in soul. Talking to me doesn't seem to present an obstacle to anyone. This is perhaps a consequence of my having gone around for years looking as if I needed talking to. But whatever the reason, the book of my life is a book of voices. When I ask myself how I arrived at where I am, the answer surprises me. Listening. Can that have been the unseen drama? Was all the rest a masquerade disguising the real no good that I was obstinately up to? Listening to them talk, the utterly wild phenomenon that is. Everyone perceiving experience is something not to have, but to have so as to talk about. Why is that? Why do they want me to hear them and their arias? Where was it decided that this was my use? Or was I from the beginning, by inclination as much as by choice, merely an ear in search of a word? Politics is the great generalizer, Leo told me, and literature the great particularizer. And not only are they in an inverse relationship to each other, they are in an antagonistic relationship. To politics, literature is decadent, soft, irrelevant, boring, wrong-headed, dull, something that makes no sense and that really oughtn't to be. Why? Because the particularizing impulse is literature. How can you be an artist and renounce the nuance? But how can you be a politician and allow the nuance? As an artist, the nuance is your task. Your task is not to simplify. Even should you choose to write in the simplest way, a la Hemingway, the task remains to impart the nuance, to elucidate the complication, to imply the contradiction. Not to erase the contradiction, not to deny the contradiction, but to see where, within the contradiction, lies the tormented human being. To allow for the chaos, to let it in, you must let it in. Otherwise, you produce propaganda, if not for a political party, a political movement. Then stupid propaganda for life itself, for life as it might itself prefer to be publicized. During the first 5-6 years of the Russian Revolution, the revolutionaries cried, "Free love, there will be free love," but once they were in power, they couldn't permit it. Because what is free love? Chaos, and they didn't want chaos. This isn't why they made their glorious revolution. They wanted something carefully disciplined, organized, contained, predictable scientifically if possible. Free love disturbs the organization, their social and political and cultural machine. Art also disturbs the organization. Literature disturbs the organization, not because it is blatantly for or against, or even subtly for or against. It disturbs the organization because it is not general. The intrinsic nature of the particular is to be particular, and the intrinsic nature of particularity is to fail to conform. Generalizing suffering, there is communism. Particularizing suffering, there is literature. In that polarity is the antagonism. Keeping the particular alive in a simplifying, generalizing world, that's where the battle is joined. You do not have to write to legitimize communism, and you do not have to write to legitimize capitalism. You are out of both. If you are a writer, you are as unallied to the one as you are to the other. Yes, you see differences, and of course you see that this shit is a little better than that shit, or that that shit is a little better than this shit. Maybe much better, but you see the shit. You are not a government clerk. You are not a militant. You are not a believer. You are someone who deals in a very different way with the world and what happens in the world. The militant introduces a faith, a big belief that will change the world, and the artist introduces a product that has no place in that world. It's useless. The artist, the serious writer, introduces into the world something that wasn't there even at the start. When God made all that stuff in 7 days, the birds, the rivers, the human beings, he didn't have 10 minutes for literature. And then there will be literature. Some people will like it. Some people will be obsessed by it, want to do it. No, he did not say that. If you had asked God then, there will be plumbers? Yes, there will be. Because they will have houses, they will need plumbers. There will be doctors? Yes, because they will get sick. They will need doctors to give them some pills. And literature? Literature? What are you talking about? What use does it have? Where does it fit in? Please, I'm creating a universe, not a university. No literature. Uncompromising. Tom Paine's irresistible attribute, Ira's, Leo's, and Johnny O'Day's. Had I gone down to East Chicago to meet O'Day on my arrival in Chicago, which was what Ira had arranged for me to do, my life, as a student, perhaps all life thereafter, might have fallen under different enticements and different pressures, and I might have set out to abandon the secure strictures of my background under the passionate tutelage of a monolith quite different from the University of Chicago. But the burden of a Chicago education, not to mention the demands being made by Mr. Glucksman's supplemental program to deconventionalize my mind, meant that it wasn't until early December that I was able to take a Saturday morning off and travel by train to meet Ira Ringel's Army mentor, the steelworker whom Ira had once described to me as a Marxist from the belt buckle both ways. The tracks of the South Shore Line were at 63rd and Stony Island, only a 15-minute walk from my dormitory. I boarded the orange-painted car and took a seat. The conductor sounded off the names of the dirty towns along the line: Heggswich, Hammond, East Chicago, Gary, Michigan City, South Bend, and I was as stirred up again as if I were listening to On a Note of Triumph. Coming as I did from industrial North Jersey, I confronted a not unfamiliar landscape. Looking south to Elizabeth, Linden, and Rahway from the airport, we too had the complex superstructure of refineries off in the distance, and the noxious refinery odors, and the plumes of fire up at the top of the towers, burning off the gas from the distilling of petroleum. In Newark, we had the big factories and the tiny job shops. We had the grime, we had the smells, we had the crisscrossing rail lines and the lots of steel drums, and the hills of scrap metal and the hideous dump sites. We had black smoke rising from the high stacks, a lot of smoke coming up everywhere, and the chemical reek and the malt reek and the Secaucus pig farm reek sweeping over our neighborhood when the wind blew hard. And we had trains like this one that ran up on embankments through the marshes, through bulrushes and swamp grass and open water. We had the dirt and we had the stink, but what we didn't have and couldn't have was Heggswich, where they'd built the tanks for the war. We didn't have Hammond, where they built the girders for bridges. We didn't have the grain elevators along the shipping canal coming down from Chicago. We didn't have the open hearth furnaces that lit up the sky when the mills were pouring steel, a red sky that on clear nights I could see from as far away as my dormitory window way down in Gary. We didn't have U.S. Steel and Inland Steel and Jones Laughlin and Standard Bridge and Union Carbide and Standard Oil of Indiana. We had what New Jersey had. Concentrated here was the power of the Midwest. What they had here was a steel-making operation, miles and miles of it stretching along the lake through 2 states and vaster than any other in the world, coke furnaces and oxygen furnaces transforming iron ore into steel, overhead ladles carrying tons of molten steel, hot metal pouring like lava onto moles, and amid all this flash and dust and danger and noise, working in temperatures of 100 degrees, sucking in vapors that could ruin them, men at labor around the clock, men at work that was never finished. This was an America that I was not a native of and never would be, and that I possessed as an American nonetheless. While I stared from the train window, took in what looked to me to be mightily up-to-date, modern, the very emblem of the industrial 20th century, and yet an immense archaeological site, no fact of my life seemed more serious than that. To my right, I saw block after block of soot-covered bungalows, the steelworkers' houses with gazebos and bird baths in the backyards, and beyond the houses the streets lined with low, ignominious-looking stores where their families shopped. And so strong was the impact on me of the sight of a steelworker's everyday world, its crudity, its austerity, the obdurate world of people who were always strapped, in debt, paying things off. So inspiring was the thought, for the hardest work the barest minimum, for breaking their backs the humblest rewards, that, needless to say, none of my feelings would have seemed strange to Ira Ringgold, while all of them would have appalled Leo Glucksman. "What about this wife the Iron Man's got?" was almost the first thing O'Day said to me. "Maybe I'd like her if I knew her, but that's an imponderable. Some people I value have intimate friends to whom I'm indifferent. The comfortable bourgeoisie, the circle he now lives in with her, I'm not so sure. There's a problem with wives altogether. Most guys who marry are too vulnerable. They've given hostages to reaction in the person of their wives and kids. So it's left to a little coterie of hardened characters on their own to take care of what's got to be taken care of. Sure, all of this is a grind, sure. It'd be nice to have a home, to have a soft woman waiting at the end of the day, maybe to have a couple of kids. Even guys who know what it's all about get fed up once in a while, but my immediate responsibility is to the hourly paid workman, and for him, I'm not doing a tithe of the work I should be doing. Whatever the sacrifice, what you have to remember is that movements like these are always upwards, regardless of how the immediate issue turns out. The immediate issue was that Johnny O'Day had been driven from the union and had lost his job. I met him at a rooming house where he hadn't paid rent in 2 months. He had a week or more to come up with the money or be thrown out. His small room had a window onto some sky and was neatly kept. The mattress of the single bed rested not on a box spring, but on metal webbing and was tightly, even beautifully made up, and the dark green paint on the iron bedstead wasn't chipped or peeling, as it was on the noisy radiator, but was disheartening to look at all the same. Altogether, the furnishings were no more meager than those that Leo lived among at International House, and yet the aura of desolation startled me until O'Day's quiet, even voice and his peculiarly sharp enunciation began very powerfully to mute the presence of everything except O'Day himself, made me think I ought to get up and go. It was as though whatever wasn't in that room had vanished from the world. The instant he came to the door and let me in and politely invited me to be seated across from him, on one of the room's 2 bridge chairs, at a table just large enough for his typewriter, I had a sense not so much of everything's having been torn away from O'Day except this existence, but, worse, of O'Day's having almost sinisterly torn himself away from everything that was not this existence. Now I understood what Ira was doing in the shack. Now I understood the seed of the shack and the stripping back of everything, the aesthetic of the ugly that Ephraim was to find so insufferable, that left a man lonely and monastic, but also unencumbered, free to be bold and unflinching and purposeful. What O'Day's room represented was discipline. That discipline which says that however many desires I have, I can circumscribe myself down to this room. You can risk anything if at the end you know you can tolerate the punishment, and this room was a part of the punishment. There was a firm impression to be taken from this room, the connection between freedom and discipline, the connection between freedom and loneliness, the connection between freedom and punishment. O'Day's room, his cell, was the spiritual essence of Ira's shack. And what was the spiritual essence of O'Day's room? I'd find that out some years later when, on a visit to Zurich, I located the house with the commemorative tablet bearing Lenin's name, and after bribing a janitor with a handful of Swiss marks, was allowed to see the anchorite room where the revolutionary founder of Bolshevism had lived in exile for a year and a half. O'Day's appearance should have been no surprise. Ira had described him exactly as he still was, a man constructed like a heron, a lean, taut, blade-faced 6-footer with close-cut gray hair, eyes that also appeared to have turned gray, a sharp, large knife of a nose, and skin, a hide, lined as though he were well beyond his 40s. But what Ira hadn't described was how zealotry had bestowed the look of a body that had a man locked up inside serving the severe sentence that was his life. It was the look of a being who has no choice. His story has been made up beforehand. He has no choice about anything. To tear himself from things in behalf of his cause, that's all there is for him to do. And he is not susceptible to others. It isn't just the physique that is a filament of steel, enviably narrow. The ideology, too, is tool-like and contoured like the edgewise silhouette of the heron's fuselage. I remembered Iris telling me that O'Day carried a light punching bag in his gear, and that in the Army he was so quick and strong that, if forced to, he could lick 2 or 3 guys together. I'd been wondering all the way down on the train if there'd be a punching bag in his room. And there was. It wasn't in a corner hanging at head height, as I'd been imagining it, and as it would have been if we'd been in a gym. It was on the floor, lying on its side against a closet door, a stout, tear-shaped leather bag so old and battered it looked less like leather than like the bleached-out body part of some slaughtered animal, as though, to keep in fighting trim, O'Day worked with the testicle off a dead hippopotamus. A notion, not rational, but impossible, because of my initial fear of him, to make go away. I remembered the words that O'Day had spoken the night that he poured out his frustration to Ira about not being able to spend his days building the party here in the harbor. I ain't that good at organizing, that's true. You have to be something of a hand-holder with timid Bolsheviks, and I lean more to bopping their heads. I remembered, because I had gone home and entered those words into my radio play then in progress, a play about a strike in a steel plant wherein every last drop of the argot of Johnny O'Day emerged inviolate from one Jimmy O'Shea. Once O'Day had written to Ira, "I'm getting to be the official son of a bitch of East Chicago and its environs, and that means winding up in Fist City." Fist City became the title of my next play. I couldn't help it. I wanted to write about things that seemed important, and the things that seemed important were things I didn't know. And what with the words at my disposal then, I instantly transformed everything into agitprop anyway, thus losing within seconds whatever was important about the important and immediate about the immediate. O'Day was broke, and the party too broke to hire him as an organizer or to help him financially in any way, and so he was filling his days writing leaflets for Millgate distribution, using the few dollars secretly contributed by some of his old steelworker buddies to pay for the paper and to rent a mimeograph machine and a staple machine, and then, at the end of each day, himself handing out the leaflets over in Gary. The change he had left, he spent on food. "My case against Inland Steel isn't finished," he told me, going right to the point, leveling with me as though I were an equal, an ally, if not already a comrade, talking to me as though Ira had somehow caused him to think that I was twice my age, 100 times more independent, 1,000 times more courageous. But it looks as if management and the red baiters in the USA-CIO have got me fired and blacklisted for good. In every walk of life, all over this country, the move is on to crush the party. They don't know that it isn't Phil Murray's CIO that decides the great historic issues. With this China, it's the American worker who will decide the great historic issues. In my occupation, there are already more than 100 unemployed iron workers in this local union. This is the first time since 1939 that there haven't been more jobs than men, and even the iron workers, the most obtuse section of the whole wage earning class, are at last beginning to question the setup. It's coming, I assure you, it's coming. Still, I got hauled before the executive board of the Iron Workers Local and expelled by reason of my membership in the party. These bastards didn't want to expel me. They wanted me to repudiate my membership. The rat press, which is zeroed in on me hereabouts. Here, he said, handing me a clipping from beside the typewriter. Yesterday's Gary Post-Tribune. The rat press would have made a big thing out of that. And although I have retained my working card in the ironmongers, the word would have gone out to the contractors and the gang bosses to blacklist me. It's a closed industry, so expulsion from the union means that I'm deprived of my work in my trade. Well, to hell with them. I can fight better from the outside anyway. The rat press, the labor fakers, the phony city administrations of Gary and East Chicago regard me as dangerous? Good. They're attempting to keep me from making a living? Fine. I've got nobody dependent on me but me. And I don't depend on friends or women or jobs or other conventional prop to existence. I get along anyway. If the Gary Post, he said, taking back from me and neatly folding in two the clipping that I hadn't dared to look at while he spoke, and the Hammond Times and the rest of them think that they're going to run us Reds out of Lake County with these kind of tactics, they're playing the wrong number. If they'd left me alone, I would probably have one day soon left under my own power. But now I've got no money to go anywhere, and so they're going to have to continue to deal with me. At the mill gates, the attitude of the workers when I hand them my leaflets is on the whole friendly and interested. They flash me the V, and it's moments like that when the books balance for a while. We've got our share of fascist workers, of course. Monday night, the other night, while I was handing out my leaflets at the Gary Big Mill, a fat log starts calling me a traitor and a prick. And I don't know what all else he had in mind. I didn't wait to find out. I hope he likes soup and soft biscuits. Tell that to the Iron Man, he said, smiling for the first time, though in a distressing way, as if by forcing a smile were among the more difficult things he had to do. Tell him I'm still in pretty good shape. Come on, Nathan, he said, and it chagrined me to hear this unemployed steelworker utter my given name. That is, my new college obsessions, my budding superiority, my lapse from political commitment chagrined me. When I had just heard him describe, in the same quiet, even voice, with the same careful enunciation, and with an intimate familiarity that did not seem culled from books, the great historic issues. China, 1939. Above all, describe the harsh, sacrificial selflessness imposed by his mission to the hourly paid working man. Nathan, spoken in the very voice that had raised gooseflesh on my arms by saying, "It's coming, it's coming. I assure you it's coming." "Let's get something for you to eat," said O'Day. From the beginning, the difference between O'Day's speech and Ira's was unmistakable to me. Perhaps because there was nothing contradictory in O'Day's aims, because O'Day was living the life he proselytized, because the speech was a pretext for nothing else, because it appeared to rise from the core of the brain that is experience, there was a tautened, to-the-point quality to what he said. The thinking firmly established, the words themselves seemingly shot through with will, nothing inflated, no waste of energy, but instead, in every utterance, a wily shrewdness and, however utopian the goal, a deep practicality, a sense that he had the mission as much in his hands as in his head, a sense, unlike that communicated by Ira, that it was intelligence and not a lack of intelligence that was availing itself of and wielding his ideas. The tang of what I thought of as the real permeated his talk. It wasn't difficult to see that the something Ira's speech was a weak imitation of was O'Day's. The tang of the real, though also the speech of someone in whom nothing ever laughed, with the result that there was a kind of madness to his singleness of purpose, and that also distinguished him from Ira. In attracting, as Ira did, all the human contingencies that O'Day had banished from life, there was sanity, the sanity of an expansive, disorderly existence. By the time I got back on the train that evening, the power of O'Day's unrelenting focus had so disoriented me that all I could think about was how I was to tell my parents that 3.5 months was enough. I was quitting college to move down to the steel town of East Chicago, Indiana. I wasn't asking them to support me financially. I would find work to support myself, menial work more than likely, but that was just as well, if not the whole idea. I could no longer justify continuing to accede to bourgeois expectations, theirs or mine, not after my visit with Johnny O'Day, who, despite all the soft-spokenness concealing the passion, came across as the most dynamic person I had ever met, more so even than Ira. The most dynamic, the most unshatterable, the most dangerous. Dangerous because he didn't care about me the way Ira did, and he didn't know about me the way Ira did. Ira knew I was somebody else's kid, understood intuitively, and had been told by my father for good measure, and didn't try to take from me my freedom or take me away from where I came from. Ira never tried to indoctrinate me beyond a certain point, nor was he desperate to hold on to me, though all his life he was probably love-hungry enough and love-starved enough to be always yearning for close attachments. He just borrowed me for a while when he came to Newark, occasionally borrowed me to have somebody to talk to when he was lonely visiting Newark or by himself up at the shack, but never took me anywhere near a communist meeting. That whole other life of his was almost entirely invisible to me. All I got was the rant and the raving and the rhetoric, the window dressing. He was not just unrestrained. With me there was tact in Ira. Fanatically obsessive as he was, toward me there was a great decency, a tenderness, and a consciousness of a kind of danger that he was willing to face himself, but didn't wish to expose a kid to. With me there was a big-bodied good-naturedness that was the other side of the fury and the rage. Iris saw fit to educate me only to a point. I never saw the zealot whole. But to Johnny O'Day, I wasn't anybody's son he had to protect. To him, I was a body to be recruited. Don't trifle with the Trotskyites at that university, O'Day had told me at lunch, as though Trotskyites were a problem I'd come to East Chicago to talk over with him. Huddled head to head, we ate hamburgers in the booth of a dog tavern, where his credit was still good with the Polish proprietor, and where a boy like me, a sucker for manly intimacy, found the situation much to his liking. The little street, not far from the mill, was all taverns except for a grocery on one corner and a church on the other, and right across the way, an open lot that was half scrap heap, half garbage dump. The wind was strong from the east and smelled of sulfur dioxide. Inside, the smell was of smoke and beer. I'm unorthodox enough to contend that it's all right to play with Trotskyites, O'Day said, as long as you wash your hands afterwards. There are people who handle venomous reptiles every day, going so far as to milk them of their poison in order to provide an antidote to it, and few of them are fatally bitten, precisely because they know the reptiles are venomous. What's a Trotskyite? I asked. You don't know about the fundamental divergence of communists and Trotskyites? No. For the next few hours, he told me. The story was replete with terms like scientific socialism, neo-fascism, bourgeois democracy, with names unknown to me like, to begin with, Leon Trotsky, names like Eastman, Lovestone, Zinoviev, Bukharin, with events unknown to me like the October Revolution and the 1937 trials, with formulations beginning, the Marxian precept that the contradictions inherent in a capitalist society and, obedient to their fallacious reasoning, Trotskyites conspired to keep the aims from being achieved by, but no matter how abstruse or complicated the story's ins and outs, coming from O'Day, every word struck me as pointed and not at all remote. Not a subject he was talking about to talk about it. Not a subject he was talking about for me to write a term paper about it, but a struggle whose ferocity he had suffered through. It was nearly 3 when he relaxed his hold on my attention. His way of having you listen was extraordinary and had much to do with a promise he silently made not to imperil you as long as you concentrated on his every word. I was exhausted. The tavern was all but empty, and yet I had the sense that everything possible was going on around me. I remembered back to that night, as a high school kid, when I'd defied my father and gone off to be Ira's guest at the Wallace rally in Newark, and once again I felt in communion with a quarrel about life that mattered, the glorious battle that I had been looking for since I turned 14. "Come on," O'Day said after glancing at his watch. "I'm going to show you the face of the future." And there we were. There I was. There it was, the world where I had long secretly dreamed of being a man. The whistle blew, the gates opened wide, and here they came, the workers. Corwin's far-flung, ordinary men, unspectacular but free, the little guy, the common man, the Poles, the Swedes, the Irish, the Croatians, the Italians, the Slovenes, the men who jeopardized their lives making steel, risk being burned or crushed or blown apart, and all for the profit of the ruling class. I was so excited I couldn't see faces. I couldn't really see bodies. I saw only the crude mass of them heading through the gates for home, the mass of the American masses, brushing by me, knocking into me, the face, the force of the future. The impulse to cry out in sadness, anger, protest, triumph was overwhelming, as was the urge to join that mob, not quite a menace and not quite a mob, to join the chain, the rush of men in their thick-soled boots and follow them all home. The noise of them was like the noise of a crowd in an arena before a fight. And the fight? The fight for American equality. From a pouch slung over his hip, O'Day took a wad of leaflets and thrust them at me. And there, within sight of the mill, the smoking basilica that must have been a mile long, the two of us stood side by side, giving a leaflet to any man coming off the 7 to 3 shift who stuck out a hand to take one. Their fingers touched mine, and my whole life was turned inside out. Everything in America that was against these men was against me too. I took the leafleteer's vow. I would be nothing but the instrument of their will. I would be nothing but rectitude. Oh yes, you feel the pull with a man like O'Day. Johnny O'Day doesn't take you 50% of the way and leave you alone. He takes you all the way. The revolution is going to wipe out this and replace it with that, the unironic clarity of the political Casanova. When you're 17 years old and you meet a guy who has an aggressive stance and who has it all figured out idealistically and all figured out ideologically, and who has no family and no relatives and no house, who is without all that stuff that was pulling Ira in 20 different directions, without all those emotions pulling Ira in 20 directions, without all that upheaval a man like Ira takes on because of his nature, without the turbulence of wanting to make a revolution that will change the world, while also mating with a beautiful actress and acquiring a young mistress, and fiddling with an aging whore, and longing for a family, and struggling with a stepchild, and inhabiting an imposing house in the show business city, and a proletarian shack in the backwoods, determined to assert unflaggingly, one being in secret and another in public and a third in the interstices between the two, to be Abraham Lincoln and Ayn Rand and Ira Ringgold all rolled up into a frenzied, overexcitable group self, who instead is claimed by nothing but his idea, who is responsible to nothing but the idea, who understands almost mathematically what he needs to live an honorable life, then you think as I did, here is where I belong. Which was probably what Ira had thought on encountering O'Day in Iran. O'Day had viscerally influenced him the same way, takes you and ties you to the world of revolution. Only Ira had wound up with all that other inadvertent, undesigned, unpremeditated stuff, bouncing all those other balls with the same enormous effort to prevail, while all that O'Day had, was, and wanted, was nothing other than the real thing. Because he wasn't a Jew? Because he was a Goy? Because, as Ira had told me, O'Day had been raised in a Catholic orphanage? Was that why he could be so thoroughly, so ruthlessly, so visibly living nothing but the bare bones? There was none of the softness in him that I knew was inside me. Did he see my softness? I would not let him. My life with its softness squeezed out here in East Chicago with Johnny O'Day. Down here at the mill gate at 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. and 11 p.m., distributing leaflets after each shift. He will teach me how to write them, what to say, and how best to say it so as to move the working man to action and make of America an equitable society. He will teach me everything. I am someone moving out of the comfortable prison of his human irrelevance, and here, at the side of Johnny O'Day, entering the hypercharged medium that is history. A menial job, an impoverished existence, yes, but here, at the side of Johnny O'Day, not a meaningless life. To the contrary, everything of significance, everything profound and important. From such emotions, you would not imagine that I could ever find my way back. But by midnight, I still hadn't phoned my family to tell them my decision. O'Day had given me 2 thin pamphlets to read on the train to Chicago. One was called Theory and Practice of the Communist Party, the first course in a Marxist study series prepared by the National Education Department of the Communist Party, in which the nature of capitalism, of capitalist exploitation, and of the class struggle were devastatingly exposed in just under 50 pages. O'Day promised that the next time we met, we would discuss what I'd read, and he'd give me the second course, which developed on a higher theoretical level, he told me, the subjects of the first course. The other pamphlet I took back on the train that day, Who Owns America by James S. Allen, predicted that capitalism, even in its most powerful embodiment in America, threatens to reproduce disaster on an ever-widening scale. The cover was a cartoon, in blue and white, of a porky-looking fat man in top hat and tails, seated arrogantly atop a swollen money bag labeled Profits, his own bloated belly adorned with a $sign. Smoking away in the background and representing the property expropriated unjustly by the rich ruling class from the principal victims of capitalism, the struggling workers, were the factories of America. I had read both pamphlets on the train. In my dormitory room, I read them through again, hoping to find in their pages the strength to phone home with my news. The final pages of Who Owns America were entitled, Become a Communist. These I read aloud as though addressing me were Johnny O'Day himself. Yes, together we will win our strikes. We will build our unions. We will gather together to fight at every step and stage the forces of reaction, of fascism, of war-making. Together we will seek to build up a great independent political movement that will contest the national election with the parties of the trusts. Not for one moment will we give rest to the usurpers, to the oligarchy which is bringing ruin to the nation. Let no one question your patriotism, your loyalty to the nation. Join the Communist Party. As a communist, you will be able to fulfill, in the deepest sense of the word, your responsibility as an American. I thought, why isn't this reachable? Do it the way you got on that bus and went downtown and attended the Wallace rally. Is your life yours, or is it theirs? Have you the courage of your convictions, or haven't you? Is this America the kind of America you want to live in, or do you intend to go out and revolutionize it? Or are you, like every other idealistic college student you know, another selfish, privileged, self-involved hypocrite? What are you afraid of? The hardship? The opprobrium? The danger? Or O'Day himself? What are you afraid of, if not your softness? Don't look to your parents to get you out of this. Don't call home and ask permission to join the Communist Party. Pack your clothes and your books and get back down there and do it. If you don't, is there really any distinction to be made between your capacity for daring to change and Lloyd Brown's? Between your audacity and the audacity of Brownie, the grocer's assistant who wants to inherit Tommy Minerick's seat out at the rock dump in Zinktown? How much does Nathan's failure to renounce his family's expectations and battle his way to genuine freedom differ from Brownie's failure to oppose his family's expectation and battle his way to freedom? He stays in Zinktown selling minerals, I stay in college studying Aristotle, and I end up being Brownie with a degree. At 1 a.m, I crossed the Midway from my dormitory through a snowstorm, my first Chicago blizzard blowing in, to International House. The Burmese student on desk duty recognized me, and when he unlocked the security door and I said, "Mr. Glucksman," he nodded and, despite the hour, let me through. I went up to Leo's floor and knocked on the door. You could smell curry in the hallway hours after one of the foreign students had cooked up dinner for himself on the hot plate in his room. I was thinking, some Indian kid comes all the way from Bombay to study in Chicago, and you're afraid to live in Indiana. Stand up and fight against injustice. Turn around. Go. The opportunity is yours. Remember the mill gate. But because I had been pitched so high for so many hours, for so many adolescent years, been overcome with all these new ideals and visions of truth, when Leo, in his pajamas, opened his door, I burst into tears, and by doing so, misled him badly. Out of me poured all that I hadn't dared show to Johnny O'Day, the softness, the boyness, all the unworthy un-O'dayness that was me. Everything non-essential that was me. Why isn't this reachable? I lacked what I suppose Ira also lacked, a heart without dichotomies, a heart like the enviably narrow O'Day's, unequivocal, ready to renounce everyone and everything except the revolution. "Oh, Nathan," Leo said tenderly, "my dear friend." It was the first time he had called me anything other than Mr. Zuckerman. He sat me down at his desk, and standing over me just inches away, watched while, still weeping, I undid the buttons of a mackinaw already wet and heavy with snow. Maybe he thought that I was preparing to undo everything. Instead, I began to tell him about the man I had met. I told him that I wanted to move down to East Chicago and to work with O'Day. I had to, for the sake of my conscience. But could I do it without telling my parents? I asked Leo if that was honorable. "You shit. You whore. Get out of here, you two-faced little cock-tease whore," he said, and shoved me from the room and slammed the door. I didn't understand. I didn't really understand Beethoven. I was continuing to have trouble with Kierkegaard, and what Leo was shouting and why he was shouting it was also incomprehensible to me. All I'd done was to tell him I was contemplating living alongside a 48-year-old communist steelworker who, as I described him, looked a little like an aging Montgomery Clift, and Leo, in turn, throws me out. Not just the Indian student across the hall, but nearly all the Indian students and Oriental students and African students on the corridor came out of their rooms to see what the commotion was. Most of them at this hour were in their underwear, and what they were looking at was a boy who had only just discovered that heroism was not as easy to come by at 17 as was a 17-year-old's talent for being drawn to heroism and to the moral aspect of just about everything. What they thought they saw was something else altogether. What they thought they saw, I myself still couldn't figure out until, at my next humanities class, I realized that Leo Glucksman would henceforth mark me down not merely as nobody superior, let alone nobody destined to be a great man, but as the most callow, culturally backward, comical Philistine ever, scandalously to have been admitted to the University of Chicago. And nothing I said in class or wrote for class during the remainder of the year, none of my lengthy letters explaining myself and apologizing and pointing out that I hadn't left the college to join up with O'Day, would ever disabuse him. I sold magazines door to door in Jersey that next summer, not quite the same as distributing handbills at an Indiana steel mill at dawn, dusk, and in the dark of night. Though I was on the phone with Ira a couple of times, and we made a plan for me to come out to see him at the shack in August. To my relief, he had to cancel at the last minute, and then I was back at school. Some weeks later, in the final days of October 1951, I heard that he and Artie Sokolow, as well as the director, the composer, the program's two other leading actors, and the famous announcer, Michael J. Michaels, had been fired from the Free and the Brave. My father gave me the news on the phone. I didn't regularly see a newspaper, and the news, he told me, had appeared the day before in both Newark papers, as well as in every one of the New York dailies. Red-hot iron, they had called him in the headline of the New York Journal-American, where Bryden Grant was a columnist. The story had broken in Grant's grapevine. I could tell from my father's voice that what he was most worried about was me, about the implications of my having been befriended by Ira, and so indignantly I said to him, "Because they call him a communist, because they lie and call everybody a communist, they can lie and call you one too," he said. "Yes, let them. Just let them." But no matter how much I shouted at my liberal chiropodist father, as though he were the radio executive who had fired Ira and his cohorts, no matter how loudly I claimed that the accusations were as inapplicable to Ira as they would be to me, I knew from having spent just that one afternoon with Johnny O'Day how mistaken I could be. Ira had served over 2 years with O'Day in Iran. O'Day had been his best friend. When I knew him, he was still getting long letters from O'Day and writing back to him. Then there was Goldstein and all he'd said in his kitchen. "Don't let him fill you full of communist ideas, kid. The communists get a dummy like Ira and they use him. Get out of my house, you dumb communist prick." I had willfully refused to put all this together. This and the record album and more. "Remember that afternoon in my office, Nathan, when he came over from New York? I asked him, and you asked him, and what did he tell us? The truth. He told the truth. 'Are you a communist, Mr. Ringgold?' I asked him. 'Are you a communist, Mr. Ringgold?' You asked him." With something shocking in his voice I had never heard before, my father cried, "If he lied, if that man lied to my son." What I heard in his voice was a willingness to kill. How can you be in business with somebody who lies to you about something that fundamental? How? It wasn't a child's lie, my father said. It was an adult lie. It was a motivated lie. It was an unmitigated lie. On he went, while I was thinking, why did Ira bother? Why didn't he tell me the truth? I would have gone up to Zinktown anyway, or tried to. But then he didn't just lie to me. That wasn't the point. He lied to everyone. If you lie about it to everyone, automatically and all the time, you're doing it deliberately to change your relationship to the truth. Because nobody can improvise it. You tell the truth to this person. You tell the lie to the other person, it won't work. So the lying is part of what happens when he put on that uniform. It was in the nature of his commitment to lie. Telling the truth, particularly to me, never occurred to him. It would have not only put our friendship at risk, but put me at risk. There were lots of reasons why he lied, but none that I could explain to my father, even if I had understood them all at the time. After speaking with my father and my mother, who said, "I beg Dad not to call you, not to upset you," I tried to telephone Ira at West 11th Street. The phone was busy all evening, and when I dialed again the next morning and got through, Wondrous, the black woman whom Eve used to summon to the dinner table with the little bell that Ira loathed, said to me, "He don't live here no more," and hung up. Because Ira's brother was still very much my teacher, I restrained myself from phoning Murray Ringgold, but I did write to Ira, to Newark, to Lehigh Avenue, in care of Mr. Ringgold, and again to the box address up in Zinktown. I got no answer. I read the clippings my father sent me about him from the papers, crying aloud, "Lies, lies, filthy lies." But then I remembered Johnny O'Day and Irwin Goldstein, and I didn't know what to think. Less than 6 months later, there appeared in America's bookstores, rushed into publication, "I Married a Communist" by Eve Frame, as told to Bryden Grant. The jacket, front and back, was a replica of the American flag. On the front of the jacket, the flag was ripped raggedly open, and within the oval tear was a recent black and white photograph of Ira and Eve. Eve looking softly lovely in one of her little hats, with a dotted veil she'd made famous, wearing a fur jacket and carrying a circular purse. Eve smiling brightly at the camera as she walked arm in arm down West 11th Street with her husband. But Ira didn't look at all happy. From beneath his fedora, he stared through his heavy glasses into the camera with a grave and troubled expression. Very nearly at the bullseye center of that book jacket proclaiming, "I Married a Communist" by Eve Frame, as told to Bryden Grant, Ira's head was circled boldly in red. In the book, Eve claimed that Iron Rin, alias Ira Ringgold, was a communist madman who had assaulted and browbeaten her with his communist ideas, lecturing her and Silford every night at dinner, shouting at them and doing his best to brainwash both of them and make them work for the communist cause. I don't believe I've ever seen anything so heroic in my life as my young daughter, who loved nothing so much as to sit quietly all day playing her harp, arguing strenuously in defense of American democracy against this communist madman and his Stalinist totalitarian lies. I don't believe I've ever seen anything so cruel in my life as this communist madman using every tactic out of the Soviet concentration camp to bring this brave child to her knees. On the facing page was a photograph of Silford, but not the Silford I knew, not the large, sardonic 23-year-old in the gypsy clothes who had hilariously helped me through my dinner that night at the party and who afterward had delighted me by filleting one after another of her mother's friends, but a tiny, round-faced Silford, big black eyes, and pigtails and a party dress, smiling at her beautiful mommy over a Beverly Hills birthday cake. Silford in a white cotton dress embroidered with little strawberries, its full skirt puffed out with petticoats and cinched by a full sash tied at the back in a bow. Silford, at 42 pounds and 6 years of age, in white anklets and black Mary Janes. Silford, not as Pennington's child, or even Eve's, but as God's. The picture achieving what Eve intended at the outset with the misty daydream of a name, the deep profanation of Silford, the etherealization from solid to air. Silford as saint, perfectly innocent of all the vices and taking up no room in this world whatsoever. Silford as everything that antagonism is not. "Mama, Mama," the brave child cries helplessly to her mother in one climactic scene. "Those men up in his study are speaking Russian." Russian agents, Russian spies, Russian documents, secret letters, phone calls, hand-delivered messages pouring into the house day and night from communists all over the country. Cell meetings in the house and in the secret communist hideaway in the remotest wilds of New Jersey. And in a parlor-floor apartment briefly leased by him in Greenwich Village on Washington Square North, across from the famous statue of General George Washington, an apartment acquired by Iron Rin chiefly for the purpose of providing a safe haven for communists on the run from the FBI. "Lies," I cried, "completely crazy lies. But how was I to know for sure? How was anyone? What if the startling preface to her book was true? Could it possibly be? For years, I wouldn't read Ephraim's book, protecting as long as I could my original relationship to Ira, even when I had been progressively abandoning him and his haranguing to a point where I had all but accomplished the rejection of him. But because I didn't want this book to be the awful end to our story, I skipped around and didn't read thoroughly beyond the preface. Nor was I avidly interested in what was written in the papers about the treacherous hypocrisy of the leading actor of The Free and the Brave, who'd been personifying all these great American characters despite having cast himself in a more sinister role entirely. Who had, according to Eve's testimony, been personally responsible for submitting every one of Sokolo's scripts to a Russian agent for suggestions and approval. To see somebody I loved publicly vilified, why would I want to take part in that? There was no pleasure in it, and there was also nothing I could do about it. Even putting aside the charge of espionage, accepting that the man who had brought me into the world of men could have lied to our family about being a communist was no less painful for me than accepting that Alger Hiss or the Rosenbergs could have lied to the nation by denying that they were communists. I refused to read any of it, as I had earlier refused to believe any of it. This was how Eve's book began. The preface, the bombshell of an opening page. Is it right for me to do this? Is it easy for me to do this? Believe me, it is far from easy. It is the most awful and difficult task of my entire life. What is my motive? People will ask. How can I possibly consider it my moral and patriotic duty to inform on a man I loved as much as I loved Ayn Rand? Because as an American actress, I've sworn myself to fight the communist infiltration of the entertainment industry with every fiber of my being. Because as an American actress, I have a solemn responsibility to an American audience that has given me so much love and recognition and happiness, a solemn and unshakable responsibility to reveal and expose the extent of the communist grip on the broadcasting industry that I came to know through the man I was married to, a man I love more than any man I have ever known, but a man who was determined to use the weapon of mass culture to tear down the American way of life. That man was the radio actor Ayn Rand, alias Ira Ringgold, card-carrying member of the Communist Party of the United States of America, an American ringleader of the underground communist espionage unit committed to controlling American radio. Ayn Rand, alias Ira Ringgold, an American taking his orders from Moscow. I know why I married this man, out of a woman's love. And why did he marry me? Because he was ordered to by the Communist Party. Ayn Rand never loved me. Ayn Rand exploited me. Ayn Rand married me the better to infiltrate his way into the world of American entertainment. Yes, I married a Machiavellian communist, a vicious man of enormous cunning who nearly ruined my life, my career, and the life of my beloved child, and all of it to advance Stalin's plan for world domination.